Yeah, it's been a tremendous pleasure to be here, and you should be very thankful that you have a pastor that understands the importance of this message. And it is an incredible blessing. All the people that worked so hard behind the scenes, I'd like to thank them as far as the technology and the food and the promotion. What a tremendous effort that this church put forth. I've got a website called solidifyyourfaith.webs.com, where I've got a YouTube channel where it got a lot of creation talks. And I did this God's Detectives, VBS, in Madison, Wisconsin. And your kids can watch it. It's on BitChute. I haven't mentioned that website. I don't use it much, but that's where you can see the VBS. They brought them through God's Academy, and we taught them a lot of things, and we taught them the age-old question: what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, I didn't know the answer to this till I was 32. Who thinks the chicken came first? Who thinks the egg came first? Who doesn't know what came first? Yeah, that's where I was. Yeah, but I heard a guy when I was 32, he said, you know what God said? He made the fowl of the air. And it's like, so the chickens came first. And actually, technically, God made the chickens with the eggs inside of them. It's an incredible design, just incredible. Because if he would have made the eggs, what's going to hatch them? You know, that's kind of hard. So when I was putting this talk together, I like to go to St. Cloud State as much as I can. And my office is in the busiest building by the busiest door. I get a table and I ask people, or I have a question of the day as I'm working on my talks. And students come up and talk to me. And it's such a blessing. And I had that question, where's your faith? Hydrogen and helium turn into people, or God created? Because hydrogen and helium, that's what the Big Bang made. Hydrogen, helium, a little bit of lithium, theoretically. And we talked, and 2 students signed up to be on our Grace Campus Fellowship. We have a college ministry there. So I found that asking questions is a really good way to get people to think, because if those questions aren't answered properly, they don't go away. And hopefully they wake them up at night. And they lay in bed thinking, oh, there's that. See, for most of my life, I was an evolutionist, mainly by default, because that's all I'd ever seen. You know, our culture is really good at putting evolutionary glasses on us. You know, you look in the textbook, you see millions of years, Big Bang, billions of years, evolution. You look in the encyclopedia, it's Big Bang, evolution, millions of years, billions of years, museums. It's everywhere. Millions and billions of years, evolution, Big Bang. It's just wherever you look. You know, and because of that, my worldview was very fuzzy and foggy and blurry. I really couldn't make sense out of it. And so I really couldn't stand real strong for anything because my foundation was so weak. And I was that for most of my life, but I really didn't care. You know, I was like the man that was asked, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And he said, I don't know, and I don't care. And he was right. And that's what I was, and I can prove it. St. Cloud State, freshman year, Stewart Hall, social science, they're talking about Lucy, the supposed ape-like ancestor. And I'm sitting there thinking, why are we wasting our time on this? And so I raised my hand. Honestly, I did this, and I said, what difference does it make? We're here, we're now, who cares? And she said, well, it makes a difference to some people. And I thought, well, I guess I'm not some people, because it doesn't matter to me. And I talk to students who say that same thing. It's like, I know where you've been. I've said the same thing. And I was like that pig, and that saying, pigs don't know pigs stink. You ever heard that? Pigs don't know pigs stink because they're always in the pig pen, and the pig pen always stinks. And so they don't even have a clue or a concept that there could be fresh air out there. It's just a foreign concept to them. And similarly, I didn't know that there was accurate thinking out there. I didn't even have a concept that you could have a clear view of the world, because I was always surrounded by evolution. And that's how I lived my life till I was almost 40. And then my cousin Carol, she sent me a copy of this video by Kent Hovind called The Age of the Earth. And you can still see it online. And that video changed my life, my family's life. It just, oh man, because up until then, you know, I'd heard about the Big Bang and the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and ape-like ancestors and Noah's Ark and dinosaurs. And it's like, well, how do you put that puzzle together? You know, it's very confusing. Oh, here's a hint. There's an ice age. So I go, great, another piece that doesn't fit. And so I just went through life. I didn't care about putting this together, and then I got that package in the mail, and that evening changed our life. We watched that and we realized, hey, you know what? It's not one puzzle we're putting together, we're putting 2 puzzles. And how do you do that? You separate the pieces. Some are based on God's word and some are based on man's imagination. And the pieces fit together perfectly, and now you just got to figure out which one's true and which one's false. And so after watching that, everything snapped into focus. All the fog was blown away, it wasn't blurry anymore, I could see everything clearly, and I took these evolutionary glasses and I just threw them away. Didn't need them anymore. And that's what I'm trying to do, is get people to take off their evolutionary glasses and put on the creation glasses so everything's crystal clear, where we came from, what we're supposed to be doing, where we're going, and that's just been a tremendous blessing. So then we got more of the videos, got all the debates, 20-some debates, more videos, started going on creation vacations to creation museums and listening to creation speakers. And I still remember coming out of this museum, and I was mad. This is Creation Evidence Museum down in Glen Rose, Texas. And I come out of there and I'm ticked off. It's like, why do I got to go to Texas to learn this? Because this is just down the stream from Dinosaur Valley State Park, where there's footprints in the river. There was a flood 100-some years ago. The Paluxy River flooded. There was footprints there, dinosaurs. I took these pictures. And what they don't tell you is there used to be human footprints. Roland T. Byrd, he documented this for the American Field Museum, reported clearly defined human footprints, 15 to 20 inches long, huge. The Bible says there were giants in the earth in those days. And so I come out of this museum, and I'm mad. It's like, why do I got to go to Texas to learn this? You know, why isn't this common knowledge? Why isn't somebody doing something? And unbeknownst to me, there's a lot of people doing something. I just never saw anything they did. And so I had that burning in my belly, that passion. And it's typically, if you get that feeling, it's probably God tapping you on the shoulder, saying, hey, you do something. And so I thought, okay, Lord, I'll prepare, and perhaps my chance will come. And it started opening up. You know, I went to a youth pastor's luncheon. They meet every month. And I said, hey, guys, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got Solidify Your Faith, help people solidify their faith in the Bible by looking at science, and I gave them my card. And if I can be a blessing to you, let me know. And one of them called, and then another one called, and then the doors started opening up, and I spoke at churches and camps, and this is the very first one at college, St. Cloud State. And the Atheist Club was there. And that was, my pastor was there, and so that was an interesting night. And the person in the checkered shirt there came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for doing this. I was beginning to doubt the Bible because of what I was being taught in science class. And so we saved one of them. And I had this poster. I didn't have a kiosk or at the community college in St. Cloud. So I just took that poster into their lunchroom, ordered lunch. I was eating my lunch, and I taped it to my table right by the door that everybody had to leave. And so it made some interesting conversation. And this woman came up to me, and she's trying to make points for evolution, and I'm making points for creation. And I said, if you went out to your car and you popped the hood on your car and you looked at your engine, do you think that engine evolved? And she said, yeah, science has evolved to make the engine. And I said, no, not the engine, or not science, but the engine. Was that put together by chance random processes without any intelligence? And she said, oh, no, yeah, there was intelligence, clearly. And I said, yeah, obviously. I mean, a dead giveaway for intelligent design is multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. Wouldn't you agree? And she agreed. And I said, well, guess what? Multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. And so I said, we were designed to. And she left, and a student came up and she said, do you know who that was? And I said, no, not a clue. She said, that was the biggest, baddest atheist we have on campus. And you kicked her butt. And she said, I was texting your comments to my friend. And so it's not that I'm smarter than her, it's just that I'm right. And so we started getting in the interviews, and this is another one that I gave. This was evolution versus science. And I'm sitting at the kiosk with that poster above me, and a student comes by and asks, what do you mean? So I said, well, what do you mean, what do you mean? And he said, well, how can you have evolution versus science when evolution is science? And the key in this whole discussion, you have to define the terms. So I asked him, what do you mean by science? And he said, well, like experiments in a lab. And I said, oh, the type of science that's observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, the scientific method type of science. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, evolution is none of that. He said, well, sure it is. And I said, okay, name an experiment that proves evolution. And he said, well, there's lots of things. And if you ever want to stop a conversation for about 10 seconds and watch their eyes look up to the ceiling, just ask, well, what's the best evidence for evolution? And that's what he did. And he eventually said, geology, as if that answered it. And I said, well, what about geology? And he said, the layers of rock. And I said, the geologic column? And he said, yeah. And I said, you're kidding. You think that layers of sedimentary rock that was laid down by water all over the world prove that we came from a rock? I said, that could just as easily point to a flood, a worldwide flood in the days of Noah. But why did I say prove that we came from a rock? Because this is what their textbook says. This is their section on how life began, and it rained on the rock for millions of years. And then down there, right next to that cover there, it says, somehow, despite the harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow. Somehow is not a scientific word. And so they actually do believe they came from rocks. And I like to point that out to him because it's very absurd. And we're talking, and he said, well, what makes the most sense? And I said, exactly. That you were created by God, or that hydrogen and helium turn into people. I mean, I don't have enough faith to believe hydrogen and helium turn into people. An atheist has way more faith than I do. And at the very end of that conversation, he said, you know what, I'm going to think about this. And that's a hallelujah breakdown moment, you know, because an atheist or an evolutionist is going to think, and to think you got to see both sides. And our culture is very good at only promoting one side, and that's not education, that's indoctrination. And so he has to get creation material to think, and if he's intellectually honest, he's going to become a creationist, like Karl Baugh and Spike Pizarris and Dean Kenyon and Gary Parker. The list goes on and on and on. If you're intellectually honest and you look at the incredible design that's all around us, especially in our cells, you're going to become a creationist. And anybody see the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate several years ago? You know, I do give Bill Nye credit for stepping up to the microphone. I do give him credit, because most of them won't. And so what we did, our church rented a room and promoted it. And we had filled up all the chairs. We got all the chairs from the next classroom and filled them up. We were starting to get chairs from the lobby to put in there. We got people standing there. And what you don't see is there's 3 or 4 people in the front of the room looking at the monitor in the back of the room. So there is a definite interest in this topic. And if anybody tells you that there's not, they're lying. And so I started talking at churches, and the doors kept opening up, and schools. And this was a detective school. This was for 100-some homeschoolers. And it's like, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? But they were so well behaved. They were so good. And then our VBS gives me 5 minutes to talk to them. And that's hard, to squeeze everything into 5 minutes. And so I get it sharp. And these talks are on, at least last year's talks, are on my YouTube channel under Kids Talks. And feel free to share them. You know, share them, get the word out however we can. And then I wanted to start a creation club. I've started creation clubs on campuses, or Bible clubs. I've done that 2 or 3 times, 3 times at least. And you got to meet the students, got to get the advisor, all that stuff, and then you get to use the facilities, which is a lot of fun. And then they'll make it more restrictive, so you can't get the. But that's another talk. But I wanted to get a creation club in every community. All you need is somebody somewhere to meet, and somebody who understands, and just reach out, just have creation material. You know, show creation movies, have creation speakers once every month or 2 or 3 or whatever, but reach out into the community. What I'd love to see here is show Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. That was shown in movie theaters. And just turn this into a big theater event, you know, and just show it. And he does such a good job showing all the censorship that's happening in this argument. And then also he relates it to Nazi Germany. What happens when that mindset gets a foothold? And I'd love this to happen all around America. Have a booth like this at every county fair. You know, a booth, that's what I did. And I love doing questions of the day, surveys. The very first one was, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, and the chicken just barely won. And that gets to talk about origin. And then I can show them the textbook that says somehow life began, because they think science has it all figured out. And then the other one was, and that was, how did life begin? A, God, or B, somehow. And God just trounced them, 177 to 31. And then, did hydrogen and helium turn into people? You know, yes, 52, no, 161, don't know, 45. So we're getting them to think. And then, what are you? A mutated animal, or made in God's image? And God's image won, 98 to 17. And so we just keep asking those questions, and then people, I'm thinking of starting a creation club, but do you want to know when the meetings are? And I got however many emails, and you know, we started it, and now we're meeting every month. And what I like to do is meet right before the regional speaker comes into St. Paul, and at Twin Cities Creation Science Association. It's like, hey, if you like this, you're going to love that. Who wants to carpool? And I brought up, and you got to bring them. I brought a pastor there once, and he started a club in his town. And for a while, we were showing ours at the public library, and that was a lot of fun. And one time we were showing him, and a homeless guy came in because it was January, and he's watching this, like, you're showing this here? I was like, that's right. And we became really good friends. We spent a lot of time together during COVID because everything was locked down. And then another guy came in, and he goes, what you doing here? And I said, we're showing creation clips. And he goes, I'll be back. And he comes back with his friend, and then I showed him, and then ScienceUprising.com has like these 7-minute clips that are just hard-hitting, edgy, incredibly done, and scientists talking. And we did the origin of life and the origin of DNA. And his friend got up, and they're walking out. His friend didn't look happy, and the guy who invited him, he said, you know, if this is true, that raises some interesting questions. And I said, it most certainly does. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to get as much information out there as possible. And now what I really like is going to colleges with a marker board and just ask, how did we get here? Creation, evolution, and intelligent design. Don't know. I had to add don't know because a lot of people didn't. And this was at a community college in Minnesota. And the end result of that was 16-6 creation. And when they'd tally it down, I'd ask him, well, why did you put it under that? And this guy put it under creation. And I asked him, well, why did you do that? And he said, because that's where everyone else was. So if we get that tide going, you know, what's that thing? You got 20% on either side you can't change, but the middle 60% will just go where the current is strongest. So let's try and get this creation current going stronger and bring the people that are just kind of going with the flow. And if they'd say evolution, I'd show them their textbook that says somehow, and that's kind of eye-opening to some people. I went to a private school. This was Northwestern, and that one was like 42-2. Yeah, or 44-2, so they're doing a good job of teaching creation there. This is at St. Cloud State where all the clubs are. It was inside, then I went outside, then I went back inside, and I figured evolution would just trounce them, and it was neck and neck the whole way. And it's really, it's probably 46-39, because there was one guy who voted like 6 times, and so just delete that from the creation model. And then I went to another private school, this is Bethel, and that ended up to be 39-15, and 10 didn't know. And so it opens up conversations. This is a community college in my hometown, and it was 49-21, and there's people who put both. I had to add that column. 17 put both, and 13 didn't know. And this is very encouraging, because you know how many billions, if not trillions of dollars they've invested into pushing evolution all these decades and generations, and people aren't buying it. So that's exciting. State College in Florida. They gave me the microphone, and it was so much fun. And then they fed them Chick-fil-A at the end. But that was, I think it was their Baptist club invited me to come in. And I asked the advisor, do you want me to share the gospel? And he says, that's why we're doing this. And so there was a little, so you might want to watch that. There's a story behind that. But I encourage people to start being bold out there. We have the freedom to speak, and we should use it before we lose it. And I think we may lose it if we don't use it. So we need to be up there and be bold. Okay, and that brings us to our talk. It's creation, the censored theory. And Answers in Genesis does a really good job with this, starting with creation. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Well, let's stop there. When was the beginning? Was that millions of years? Was that billions of years? And how do we figure that out? Well, we can look in Luke chapter 3 and see there's 75 generations from Jesus to Adam. That's not billions of years or millions of years. 75 generations. And then we can go and we can add up those timelines. You know, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his son, and called his name Seth. So we got 130. That's a data point. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. 130 plus 105. And then Enos lived 90 years. So we get these data points, and we can add them all together. And if what you don't know, without graphing it out, you aren't going to read it by texting it, but when you graph it out, Adam could have known Noah's daddy. And also Noah's son could have known Jacob. And so there could be a real strong oral tradition being passed on. I mean, it's possible they knew each other. I'm not sure what happened there. But when I read the Bible when I was in high school, and junior high and high school, I read it, and it said, in the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. 930 years. And so I took that, and I did what a lot of people do today. They change definitions. 6 days, does that mean 6 days or 6 period of times? Are they millions of years, billions of years? And I couldn't believe the Bible that he could live 930 years. And so I changed what a year meant, and I divided it by 12, and I came up with 77, and I thought that's, the Bible is just saying months. And I'm very ashamed that I told my sister that. I led her down the wrong path. The Bible didn't mean years, it meant months. That's what they're counting out. But I should have kept doing the math, because in chapter 5:15, it said Mahila lived 65 years and begat Jared. What's 65 divided by 12? That's 5. How many 5-year-olds are going to be a daddy? And then you keep going doing the math. In Genesis 11, there's Selah lived 30 years and begat Eber. 30 divided by 12. That's 2.5. How many 2.5s are going to be daddies? No, that doesn't make sense. And then it goes on to say that he lived 403 years. 400 years. How do you live to be 400 years? And I think that has to do a lot with the second day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So the big question is, what's a firmament, right? And so you go into the Hebrew dictionary, and it means an expanse, a visible arch of the sky, and it's based on this rakah, expand by hammering, beat out broad, it's spread apart to stretch. And so, and then this is kind of a controversial topic, and I think that there was something up there. And this guy says condensed hydrogen turned to be transparent. So maybe there was something up there made of water that was transparent. Okay, just a concept. This isn't dogmatic, but what would happen if that happened? So just think of there's water on the earth, and there's water above the earth. And people say, and I went to the Answers in Genesis, the Creation Museum, and I asked the guy about this. What about the canopy theory? And that's what they call this, the canopy theory. And he said it doesn't work. And I said, why not? And he said, well, why did God put the stars in the sky? And I said, for signs and seasons. He said, could you see them through, 40 feet of mist or whatever? And it's like, well, no. And he said, and besides, our models don't work. If we did this, the earth would be too hot, like 600 or 6,000 degrees or something like that. And so I go away kind of scratching my head, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. If man can take sand and turn it into glass that we can see through, maybe God can take water and turn it into something we can see through. And I thought, just because our models don't work doesn't mean God's models don't work. And so what would the firmament do? It would moderate the temperatures. You could have plants all over the place. And in day 3, that's what God made. Let the waters under heaven be gathered together into one place, and the dry land appeared, and it was so. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit, and the tree yielding fruit after his kind. After his kind, after his kind. Those are biological statements. Everything produces after their kind. This is God's biology lesson. Everything produces after its kind. Where evolution says everything produces something other than its kind, given enough time. Because they think we came all from a single living cell. And also it says that the seed is in itself. That's a biological statement too. And so then the pre-flood world probably had a lot of plants on it, and all those plants producing a whole bunch of oxygen, and also and we'll get to that later. There was more oxygen before the flood, I believe, and it's going to filter out harmful rays from the sun. And because on day 7, God said it's very good. And I'm talking to Bob Enyart one time, and he doesn't go along with the canopy theory. A lot of people don't, okay? And they pick different ones. I think there's a combination of the canopy and the hydroplate. We talked about the hydroplate yesterday. And so I asked Bob, is it very good to get sunburn? Have rays come from the sun that could burn you and cause skin cancer? And he goes, I never thought of that. So I'm thinking there might have been something up there, again, not dogmatic, that filters out the harmful rays from the sun. And this one guy, he was Dr. Maury, he wanted a tomato plant in his office in the basement, and he didn't want to run a fluorescent light, so he had this fiber optic cable that came down there, and so that filtered out the harmful rays, and then he pressurized some carbon dioxide for it, and it grew like crazy. It grew to be 16 feet tall. 16 feet tall, and they put it up in a mall, I think, and it produced 15,000 baseball-sized tomatoes. It grew to be 40 feet. This is a tomato tree, and they were cherry-sized tomatoes, but they were baseball-sized. The seed was cherry-sized, and it produced baseball-sized tomatoes. So could you imagine what the whole world, if that environment was around the world, how big the trees were? And they find huge, like this thing's like 1.5 feet tall, I forget what it's called, but they find it like 100 feet tall. And just incredible the amount of oxygen, and that's why we got all the coal that we have. There was so much plant material before the flood, and in Answers in Genesis it says it takes 10 feet of plants to make 1 foot of coal. And we got coal seams like we got 200 feet thick. So does that mean there was 2,000 feet of coal there, or plants at one time? So there was something different. That's my point, is there was something different before the flood. And on the 4th day, God made the sun, moon, stars, okay? He said to them, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, and divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years. And then in verse 16, he made the stars also. That's my favorite verse. It's not even a verse, it's just a phrase. He made the stars also. You know how many millions and billions of stars are out there in the galaxies? And it's just amazing. The more we look, the more we find. And God said, hey, I did that. And he just keeps moving on. And their theory doesn't work from the evolutionary perspective because they got things spinning the wrong way. But that was yesterday's talk. Okay, and God said, let the waters bring forth after the, oh, yeah. There's people out there that say that, couldn't God use evolution to make the world? Well, God's God. He can do whatever he wants, but what he can't do is lie. So if God said he did it in 6 days, he did it in 6 days. This isn't a matter of what God could have done, it's a matter of what God said he did. And the real question is, are you going to believe what God said? And there's a lot of people doing a lot of mental gymnastics not to believe what God said. They'll say, oh, Genesis, it's just poetic, or it's figurative, or it's a framework, or it's an analogy. I was on a radio talk show out of Louisiana one time, and a guy called in and said, and asked, does the Bible say that man came from the dust of the earth? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, that's what evolution is. Man came from the dust of the earth. And God's just communicating to an ignorant people. They're not sophisticated enough to understand evolution. So the way that God made man from the dust of the earth was evolution. That's how he did it. It was just an analogy. And I said, well, God also said that the first woman came from the first man's rib. How does that fit into the analogy? And it doesn't. And it doesn't. But if you don't want to use Genesis, and just to humor you, we won't, even though Jesus always referred to Genesis as accurate historical events. And if we're not following the example of Jesus, we're on real thin ice. We should really reconsider that position. But if you don't want to use Genesis, how about Exodus? Is that literal? Can we take that to read what it says and mean what it says? And even specifically, more specifically, the 10 Commandments. Did God mean what he said there? Can we understand those words, or can those be redefined? Well, most people would say, yeah, Genesis, or 10 Commandments, that's literal. Well, right smack dab in the middle of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20:11, it says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. 6 days. That's why we have a 7-day week. We work 6, we take 1 off to worship God. And that's why we got the calendar. I can point to creation with 7-day week. I can point to Jesus with 2023. What do you think? What's 2023 point to? You know, what did BC stand for? You know, that's before Christ, 2,300 years ago or whatever. It would be 100 BC. And now this is, and then there's AD, but they're taking BC out of there. It's BCE now, before Common Era. All right. And so I was on another talk show, and the co-host said, well, couldn't each day be millions of years? And I asked him, well, what verse in the Bible causes you to think that? Because he's not getting that idea from God's holy word. He's getting that idea from man's corrupted word. And I said, it doesn't make sense anyway, because if God made the plants on day 3, are they going to live millions of years without the sun on day 4? And even if they could they live millions of more years without the birds and the bees to pollinate them? You know, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Another time I was talking to a woman, and she asked me, well, what side are you on? And I said, creation. How about you? And she said, well, can I say both? And the polite answer there is, no. You cannot say both. And it's like, well, why not? Because it's illogical. It breaks laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction. Two opposing views can't be true at the same time in the same way. Like this podium can't be in this room and out of this room at the same time in the same way. And they do a lot of mental gymnastics because the order's backwards for probably 20 things. You know, the Bible has the earth before the sun, evolution has the sun before the earth. And they'll say, well, it was just too cloudy. He couldn't see it till the 4th day. That's what they'll do, stuff like that. But they've never been able to get by this one. The whale. Okay, God created great whales. And the whales are made on day 5. The marines, the fowl of the air and the fish of the sea, they were made on, the water creatures are made on day 5. So the question that I ask is, did whales come before land animals, day 5 and day 6, like the Bible clearly teaches, or did whales come after land animals, which evolution clearly teaches? They teach that life started in the sea, went up on the land, and went back into the sea to form the whale. So can you believe that whales came before and after land animals at the same time? No, you can't. It's an illogical position. And what I like to do is, then they'll ask me, well, how old do you think the earth is? And it's like, well, I just agree with Jesus. You know, Jesus said in Mark 10:6, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So people were right at the beginning. Adam and Eve were on day 6, right at the beginning of the creation. Any form of evolution, I don't care what form of evolution you use, they have people coming at the end of creation, which is basically calling Jesus a liar. And I heard an atheist say that once. He knows more than Jesus. It's like, oh my gosh, the arrogance of man. And so God's word is true. And if you had that canopy, which would increase the air pressure, and then those plants are growing like crazy, we find in air bubbles more oxygen. Today we got about 21% oxygen. In those air bubbles, it's 32% oxygen. So we got 50% more oxygen, probably higher air pressure, and that's what Carl Baugh is simulating down in Glen Rose, Texas. He's got this biosphere, and he's simulating higher air pressure, more oxygen, and a stronger magnetic field, and he's getting piranhas that are 4 times bigger. And I asked him one time, are they really 4 times? Because he speaks at the Grace Conference every year, thegraceconference.com. It's over by Chicago, highly recommended. And I asked him, and he said, and he looks at his friend and smiles and says, oh yeah, they're at least 4 times bigger. And then the last time I saw him, how are those piranhas? And he goes, they outgrew the tank. So they just kept growing and getting bigger and bigger. And just think if the animals got bigger and bigger, because that's what we see in the fossil record. Animals that are alive today are just a lot bigger back then. 2 miles above sea level, there's an 11-foot wide oyster. 2 miles above sea level, and that bigger. So things were bigger in the past. And this is, on the 6th day, let the earth bring forth living creatures after his kind, after his kind, after his kind, another biology lesson. And bugs can only get so big based on their surface to volume ratio. I don't quite understand it, but we got a certain size, that's the limit today. And then I saw, Kent Hovind in his slides, he's got this 50-inch dragonfly. And I'm thinking, how do you know, a fossil, 50-inch dragon, how do you know that's 50 inch? That could be 5 inches, there's nothing to scale it. And then they'd say there was 18-inch cockroaches. And it's like, well, my son could Photoshop that easily, so I never used these slides until I went through the science textbook. This is the one they used in St. Cloud Biology. It says giant cockroaches and dragonflies are common. No kidding. And then I went to Sauk Rapids one, in their textbook, another biology. It said dragonflies had wingspans more than a meter. Dragonflies like this. And so something was different before the flood, I believe. I mean, it's something that was clearly different in the past, and I think the flood is when things changed. And again, these are beaver skulls that they had at the Mastodon Museum in St. Louis. The one on the left is a modern one, and the one on the right, I don't even know if it's fossil, it's just an old one, a previous one. And they've got big turtles and reptiles, they never stop growing. Never stop growing. They just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what if you had something like that never stopped growing? Maybe they turn into something like that. Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there. It's just interesting to think about. And again, this is controversial. The canopy theory is controversial. The hydroplate, even though it's those human footprints in the layer, those are controversial. And a controversy isn't bad. It just means there's strong opinions. Somewhere in there's the truth. And before you come to a conclusion on those human footprints in the dinosaur layer, you need to listen to Don Patton present his evidence, or Carl Baugh present his evidence. Because when he saw that, he excavated one of them. Yeah, and he couldn't sleep for 4 or 5 nights. He said because his whole worldview just didn't make sense, because he was a theistic evolutionist at the time. And now he's a creationist. Okay, and so then the 6th day, and God said, let us make man in our image. And God created us in his image. And so things are good, very good. And then all of a sudden, not good. Well, what's not good? And it's not good for the man to be alone. And it goes on to say, and the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on to Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed the flesh, and then he made the woman, okay? And did you know that the bones in your ribs grow back? This guy was in a car accident, a big bad one, and they had to have facial reconstruction, and they kept taking bones out of his out of his rib section. And he said, these operations required using my own bone for grafting. I noticed that the plastic surgeon would keep going back to the right side of my rib cage through the same horizontal scar, actually, and get more bone for these procedures. And then he asked him, he asked him why he hadn't run out of bone, and he looked at me blankly, and then explained that he and his team took the whole rib out each time. And they leave the part of the procedium intact, and the rib usually just grows back again and again and again. Isn't that interesting? It's just pretty amazing. And this is Gary Parker. That's his family. He's Cherokee, and they're so excited when a baby's born because they never know what color it's going to be. It's like, oh, this is so cool. And what's happening is Satan likes to divide us into he wants us to fight amongst each other. And we need to realize that, hey, we're all one family. We all come from Adam. We're all brothers and sisters in this world. We all come from Adam. And there's some skin differences, but that's minor. The major thing is, we have a sin problem. There's people that are saved and people who aren't saved, and we need to reach the ones who aren't saved. But Satan gets really good at having us fight about superficial things, and we need to stop that. There's an experiment that I heard about, haven't seen it, but if you put red ants and black ants in a jar, and they're fine, but you shake them up and you put them on the ground, they're free, but they'll fight to the death. So what we have to do is stop fighting amongst each other and look at the people that are shaking the jar. Okay, and so this is baby Jessica. Anybody hear about that back in the 80s? Baby Jessica fell down that pipe. Yeah, she's out there, she's playing, and there's this rock that's above this well, an 8-inch well, I believe. Yeah, there's a rock there. And the phone rings. Remember when phones were on the wall? And the people walking had to go answer the phone. She came out, and where's baby Jessica? And here she's fell down there like 20 feet or something like that. So she stepped down, and one foot went down, the other foot went up, and it went behind her, and it's like in her ear for 58 and a half hours. And they ripped apart that neighborhood, and they drilled down, I think it was like telephone pole drills things, and they got her out. And it was either her foot or her leg, I've read two different accounts, was black. And the doctors said, we need to cut it off. And then another doctor said, wait a minute, well, let's try a hyperbaric chamber. And again, that's the similar, it's more oxygen, they have more pressure so they can give more oxygen. And so they did that, and the toddler survived 58 hours, underwent hyperbaric treatment, and they saved her leg and her foot. And they kept putting her in there, and the thing that she lost was her little toe. That's the one that they had to lose. But they're using these hyperbaric chambers around the world on different diseases. And she was able to go to the White House and get a picture. But this one, my son actually got this football card, this Zach Taylor. He had a hyperbaric chamber. I mean, those football players, they must be sore the next day. They got to do that week after week. There's a lot of football players that have these hyperbaric chambers. And again, it just saturates your blood with oxygen, and you heal a whole lot faster. So I'm thinking, well, maybe that's what it was like before the flood. The whole world was a hyperbaric chamber where you wouldn't get tired, you could run forever. Maybe God designed it so perfectly. I don't know, that's just something I'm throwing out there. And one of the football players, he said, this is Ben Watson, he's talking about, remember those Ferguson riots, hands up, don't shoot, which was a lie. He said it's not a skin problem, it's a sin problem. And so what we need to do, he says, yeah, there's people that abuse their authorities, and there's people that don't respect authority. And by the way, most of the people who get shot are resisting arrest. They probably have other records, and they don't want to go back to jail. So we need to, and he says it's a sin problem, and then he points people to Jesus Christ. And I love how people use their platform to point people to Jesus Christ, because there's rewards in heaven for that. You could be the best basketball player that ever lived, but if you never mention Jesus, what reward do you have in heaven? Or you could be a mediocre quarterback and point people to Jesus all the time. And there's going to be tremendous rewards there. So we need to have an eternal perspective. And I try and get this across to the students. What's important in 100 years? The only thing that matters is, are you in heaven and who's there with you? That's the only thing that matters. And we need to have that be a priority throughout our day and not waste our time on stuff that's going to burn. Because there's a limited amount of time that we all have to reach as many people as we can, so let's use our time wisely. And then again, and then what happened here. So everything was very good. And is it good for the lions to be ripping the guts out of the zebra? No, but there was actually lions, this lion that wouldn't eat meat. They tried to get it to eat meat, wouldn't. They'd put blood in the milk, wouldn't do it. And then they were given a tour, and they point that to the kid, and the kid said, well, don't you read the Bible? He said, well, what do you mean? She said, don't you read Genesis 1:30? He says, and so as soon as it was done, he ran to his Bible, and it said, "And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat," and it was so. So animals were vegetarians. They didn't have to rip each other apart. And those evolutionists, they'll say, well, you can tell what they eat based on their teeth, and that's not true. You know, what's that? Sharp teeth, that's a panda. It eats bamboo. Sharp teeth must be a meat eater. No, it's a deer, Chinese water deer. Sharp teeth must be a meat eater. No, it's a fruit bat. And here's a vegetarian monkey. Okay, and actually people were supposed to eat vegetables too. And this is Adam and Eve, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, upon every tree, and which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." So that's the conditions were a lot better. They could get all their nutrients from the plants. And then there's these apricot seeds. Does anybody ever eat the peach seeds? You know, there's a pit, but if you crack the pit, there's a little walnut-sized thing in there. And you eat it, I like it, but some people say it's really bitter, and it's got, what did they call it? It's got cyanide in it. And that's what I was told. Don't eat the apple core because there's poison in the seeds. And yeah, that's right, there's cyanide in there, but what it kills is cancer. So for 15, 20 years now, I've been eating the seeds. I eat the whole core. I want the seeds. And I crack the peach pits and the apricot pits, and I crack that open, I eat them. So if it's a poison, it's really slow. It's a really slow poison. And these people, that's what they use for money. And they don't have the cancer and all that other stuff because they're very active and they eat a good diet. But if we introduce the American diet, then they start having those diseases. Those were the Hunzas up in the Himalayas. And okay, so is it very good today? No. No, it's not very good. You know, why do we have to die? Well, that brings us to the corruption. God told Adam, "Thou shalt not eat of it, that tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." So then Satan comes in and says, "Yea, hath God said." Did God really say that? Got Eve confused and said, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not surely die, ye shall be as gods." And there are people today who think there can be gods. Go into ynharari.com, and that's the first thing you're going to see on his website. History began when humans invented gods and will end when humans become gods. And that's another talk for another time. That's another tangent. But then she saw that the tree was good, was pleasant to the eyes, and desired to make one wise. And gave it to her husband. So this is the first marriage. This is God's definition of a marriage. One man, one woman, where they can produce offspring, children, and that's the best environment to raise children. That's God's model. And Satan's been doing what he can to pervert it. And then their eyes were opened, and they sewed fig leaves together and covered themselves. But our own work can't get away from our sin. And so God made them coats of skin. That was the first sacrifice. And without the shedding of blood, there's no remission. The wages of sin is death, basically, is what that's pointing to. And the whole creation is groaning. Cain kills Abel, and the world got really corrupt. And where did Cain get his wife? Adam and Eve had brothers and begat sons and daughters. Not a big deal because everything was perfect. That can't happen today, or your kids will be all deformed because you'll have the same weaknesses in your genetic code. And that's why Moses was told not to do that. Okay, then we got the catastrophe. You know, there was evil on the world continually, and God said, "I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and the fowl of the air." And people will say, well, that's a local flood. No, it's not. If it's a local flood, why did God have to take birds? They could fly away from it. And then on the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up. The windows of heaven were opened. And if you read the whole verse on that, it's like the second month, the 17th day of the month, the 600th year of Noah's life. I mean, this is a historical event. How they can say that is poetic is intellectual dishonesty, I would think. And so God didn't have to have all this horse, zebra, and donkey. You just need to have the horse kind. And it's a huge ark. I mean, this warehouse is not even as big as the ark. The ark is, and I stepped it up, that's a 300-foot warehouse. It was another 50% bigger. And they put it up in Kentucky. They've got one down at Glen Rose where he thinks that there were bulkheads, gopher wood. He thinks that's a type of putting things together like an airplane. You got those bulkheads in there, and that would make it strong. And the waters prevailed above all the high hills over the whole heavens. This was not a local flood, and that's where we get our fossils. Fossils are a sign of a flood, not millions of years. That dead deer on the road isn't turning into a fossil. It's going to get eaten up and scavenged, and it's going to decompose. The only way it gets to be a fossil is if it's buried rapidly. Therefore, if any layer has fossils in it, it was laid down rapidly. And that's the whole geologic column. That's flood, points to a flood rapidly, not millions of years. And were there dinosaurs on the ark? Yeah, 2 of every kind. Dinosaurs, well, how do you get something that big and through that little door? Well, you take the little dinosaurs. And they're going to live longer, they're going to eat less. And they came off the ark and people called them dragons. And a lot of them got killed because you don't want a T-Rex eating up your kids. And so there may be some alive today, I don't know, but people did see dinosaurs, or how could you carve a stegosaurus in this temple 900 years ago? There's a lot of evidence where dinosaurs are drawn anatomically correct. Man did see dinosaurs, and you can see it, go into my dinosaur talk for that. And then you got the rainbow. Okay, I will set a bow in the cloud, neither shall be a flood to destroy the earth anymore. So the rainbow points to Jesus never doing it with a flood again. And so the rainbow is God's symbol, and Satan's perverted it to mean something else. And then he said, replenish the earth, every moving thing shall be for you to meet after the flood. So now we can eat animals. And the flesh of the life thereof is in the blood thereof. You shall not eat it. Okay, so we can eat meat, but we don't drink the blood. And when you look after the flood, the lifespan of people drops dramatically. Noah lived 900 some years, and his son only made it to 600, and his grandson made it to 400, and it just kept on going down. So something changed after the flood. You know, maybe it was the genetics, maybe it was because that canopy wasn't there, maybe it's more radiation on us, I don't know. All I'm saying is something changed. And that brings us to the confusion. The Tower of Babel. How do we get our people groups? How do we get our different languages? God said, hey, spread out, replenish the earth. And they said, no, we're going to build a tower. And they were all there, and God went down there, and they had one language, and he said, there's nothing they won't be able to do. So he confounded the languages. And so the people who could communicate, they went off in their different directions. And then they were isolated, so different people groups had different features. And so that's where we get our different I hate to use it, R-A-C-E. I don't even like to say that. That's where we get our different R-A-C-E-S. Because on the forms, you know, like I had a census, and they asked, what race are you? And I said, and they had all these lists, and I checked other. And I put human. I'm in the human race. We're all human. Stop trying to divide us. And so I do that. Whenever they ask for race, it's human. And so that's what I do. Okay, so we confounded the languages, and that's where we have it. The people are scattered into different areas. And then Christ came 2,000 years ago, and he went to the cross to pay for our sins. And that's why I'm traveling all over the place. If you don't believe in God, the Creator, what chance do you have in putting your faith in God's Son to die for your sins so you can go to heaven? And then went to the cross and consummation. This is what I do. I go to the college, and I'll have the questions. If you were to die today, where would you go? And these are the verses that I like to use. And I usually have a Bible so that I can show it to them. So then it's a pattern that's duplicatable. Because if they put their faith in my words, 20 witnesses down the road, it's faith in words, it's going to be way different. But if I can show them from the Bible, and they show other people from the Bible, we're always getting tuned to the same tuning fork. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Because I'll always ask him, is it a gift or is it a reward? And there's 2 verses that clearly say it's a reward, or a gift. And then I bring him to 1:16. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes. So the gospel has the power, is where salvation is. So we need to everyone. You believe the gospel to be saved. Okay, so the eternal question there is, what's the gospel? And they'll say the 10 Commandments, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Bible. But we're really lucky because the Bible defines the gospel in 1 Corinthians 15, 1, 3, and 4. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. That's the gospel. You believe that, you have everlasting life. And this is a good verse because there's some religions that think we're saved by baptism. And 1 Corinthians 1:17 says, for Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel. Therefore, separating the two. So the baptism and the gospel are different. And the gospel is the one that saves. And then Acts 16:30 and 31 brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? That's the jailer asking Paul and Silas, what must I do to be saved? And he could have told them anything. And he said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved in thy house. So if there's anything more than that, they lied to the jailer. And not only that, Jesus lied to Nicodemus. And I'll have them read these verses. And this is John 3:14 to 18. It sets the tone. And look at how many times it's believe and everlasting life. And then in this one verse, it says believe 3 times. He that believes on him is not condemned, but he that believes not is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And so that's our message. We have the gospel. And I'll let Pastor close.